30% of food that we produce ends up in the trash, for example, right? When I think of that, of how we can have people that don't have food and then other people wasting 30% of what gets produced, that's a real motivator for me to try to, just limit what we throw away.
You're listening to Food Tech Talk, Supply Chain Insights from Farm to Fork, a podcast discussing the latest trends and technologies in the food and supplements industries, brought to you by Trustwell, featuring conversations with regulatory experts, quality and safety champions, and thought leaders across the industry. I'm your host, Lydia Adams, VP of Marketing at Trustwell. If you're loving the conversation, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned to the end of the episode where you'll hear our guests tell us their key food industry predictions for 2025. All right, let's jump right in. Welcome to another episode of Food Tech Talk, Supply Chain Insights from Farm to Fork. Today, we're delighted to welcome Johnathan Raineau, a globally recognized entrepreneur and innovator in food production and safety. As president of Copperprotek USA, he is pioneering the use of natural antimicrobial minerals, such as copper, to extend shelf life and revolutionize food packaging with reduced plastic use. His leadership in biosecurity technology and sustainable packaging is helping to reshape food safety standards while supporting a healthier, more sustainable future for all of us. Welcome to the show, Johnathan.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you. Great introduction.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this. I think it has far-reaching impacts. So maybe you could start us off with kind of what initially inspired you to explore sustainable innovations in food safety packaging.
Well, it's a funny story how I got into this, but I think the origin is just having parents and family that were always conscious about nature and trash. And when recycling first came around when I was a kid, it was a big thing for us. And so I think that was really the beginning, and having roots that enjoyed being outside and being in nature and whatnot. Fast forward till my adult life. About 15 years ago, I became very against plastic bottles. It was like my first pet peeve. So I cut out plastic water bottles from my life. And so I had to make some changes. And obviously I'd explain those changes to people because everyone was like, oh, why are you carrying a bottle around? And, so I had to be very vocal about what I was doing. And it made me more passionate about it, having to explain to people why all of the time. And slowly converting others one by one was also interesting to see how others would catch on. But so I became anti-plastic about 15 years ago, and single-use plastics, eventually single-use plastics, but first plastic bottles of water. And then during the pandemic, a friend of mine, now partner, Santiago, who knows friends from home who are chemists and that have been working on copper-based technology to create copper microparticles. He starts telling me about this during the pandemic, because during the pandemic, everyone was looking for antimicrobial solutions, right? So since we are an antimicrobial agent, we started looking for all these use cases and applications during the pandemic and trying to scramble to put a product together to take advantage of the demand. We actually made a hand sanitizer with it one day, which looks pretty cool. I have a bottle of that right there. That's blue colored hand sanitizer, because that's what color the copper is in its raw form. Without alcohol or anything, it works just as good, right? And it actually has a long lasting effect on your skin, so it can continue to keep you protected after use. So he pitches me during the pandemic of how it's good for plastics and it can make plastics antimicrobial. So my first response was, I don't like plastic, this isn't for me. And then I started understanding more about it and how actually the use of our technology in plastics can reduce the amount of plastic that gets consumed and the amount of plastic that gets wasted, and especially in food packaging, which is where we're focused on these days. And then I got excited about it. And then when I realized we could maybe reduce the amount of plastic that goes into food packaging because our technology is better than the technologies that are used today. And maybe we can keep food good longer. That way, extending the shelf life will mean less of it ends up in the landfills. So if we can use less plastic and throw away less plastic, that was kind of like my game changer when I really got behind this project of Copperprotek.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Like, I think even just today, I was hearing a news story about how microplastics are just everywhere now. And, like, they're like in our bodies and they're in our food and everything. And so I think there's definitely like a need to address this. So, tell me about like your global business experience. Obviously, you've had a lot of experience prior to this. How has that really influenced your building of this company? And addressing the food safety technology globally. Looking to improve your supply chain? At Trustwell, we've been connecting the dots between the food industry and data for over 40 years to give you more control and visibility across the full supply chain. Our comprehensive food logic platform and our new Genesis Foods set a new standard for compliance, transparency, and quality across the food industry. Request a demo today. The link is in the show notes, or visit us at trustwell.com.
My international experience has been crucial. For one, I wouldn't even be in this situation if I didn't start a business in Chile, and that's how I met Santiago 20 years ago. Totally unrelated. So with those connections, I landed up with this opportunity 20 years down the line. And being able to speak multiple languages, I'm fortunate enough to speak 3 languages, so that has helped me navigate through other countries and be able to just surround myself with the right people and catch on quickly to what's going on. That's been a huge help to get me involved, especially with this business, because we source the product in Chile. So we have to be very tight with the company in Chile, and I'm actually an investor with the company in Chile now. And they are partners with us and our distribution company here in the United States. So the international experience has been not only instrumental, but it's the reason how I would never have ended up in this seat if they were just looking for a distributor in the United States. It really came through the personal connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to kind of get into how this works. For those that don't know, how does Copperprotek leverage, natural minerals to really enhance food safety and shelf life? How, because it seems like it's new, right? So explain it so that we can know how it works.
Yeah, this has been the most fun for me, is just learning all of this new information and learning a whole new business. So I'm happy to talk about it. Copper Protec uses copper salts and copper minerals, right? We're not talking about metallic copper, which metallic copper is actually a product of copper salts and minerals. But when the miners take it out of the mine, it actually has like a turquoise, bluish color, and it comes out in the form of salts and sulfates and other minerals, right? So we source those copper salts and sulfates, and we create copper microparticles through a patented process. I actually have some here. So this looks like blue powder or blue flour. And if I take it out, it's just like sand, basically. I don't know if you can see it there on my finger, and so this is copper salt and copper minerals. This is approved by the FDA to consume. I can put it in my mouth. It's non-toxic. And this is our product. These are patented copper microparticles that were made through our proprietary process. And why do we need a proprietary process to make them? Because what we do is we hyperactivate the antimicrobial power in the copper. So with very little of this product, we have a high concentration of antimicrobial capacity, right? So which is important when you're mixing it with food packaging, because it has to be transparent and look good and, all those things. So we cannot put a lot of additive into that material. So with a little bit of our product, we get the what we call a biocide effect, or an antimicrobial effect, that will reduce the amount of microorganisms that are created through the moisture, through the humidity, through the oxygen, and all of these other things that are in the packaging. Creates bacteria. The bacteria consume the product, and that's why the product goes bad. So what our product does is keep that bacteria count down. Therefore, the food stays fresher longer, looks fresher longer, tastes fresher longer. All it can be ultimately packaged longer. So the science is in putting the creating the microparticles first and then getting it into the packaging so then the microparticles can kill all of the microorganisms.
Wow. I mean, it seems like a game changer, honestly. So, how does it really compare to, I guess, like traditional food safety solutions that we had in the past?
Food packaging is an industry that works very well, but has not had a lot of innovation in the past 40 years. So not many people know this, but packaging that is, I have some here. A piece of plastic that wraps your food, looks like one piece of plastic, right? But what people don't know is that has up to a dozen layers, 13 layers, 15 layers of plastic films that have been glued to each other, and each one of them has a chemical or a technology in it to keep the food safe longer, right? So one of them is a technology in there that will keep the oxygen count down by with oxygen scavengers, so the oxygen doesn't allow the bacteria to grow, right? Other layers are anti-UV, so the UV doesn't get in there. Other are thermal protection, so temperature doesn't go through. Other will be anti-puncture, so if it gets stabbed, it won't break open. So all of these layers are sandwiched on top of each other to do something to keep the food longer. And we go in the layer that contacts the food because our microparticles need to be on contact with all of the other microorganisms that are killing the food or rotting the food, right? So our theory is that we go in the contact layer, therefore, maybe we could replace some of those other layers in the future and have packaging that has less than 10 layers in it, less than 9 layers in it. And that would be our goal in the future, right? Right now, we're just a plus in the current packaging as a value add, but our vision is to be the standard that you need us in your packaging to keep the food safe. And actually, you can use a packaging that has less plastic in it, and maybe we're not even increasing the cost of your packaging afterwards because we're replacing some of the other stuff that you're already using.
That's really cool. So yeah, talk to me about kind of the goal of reducing plastic waste because you just hit on it a little bit, but in your vision of the future, like how can this technology help to reduce, or what do you expect it could reduce in terms of the amount of plastic that's used in food packaging?
Yeah, just like, I was saying, if we can get in that contact layer, then we can replace some of the other layers. So today packaging uses 13 layers. Hopefully we could get a packaging that uses half of that, right? Get that down to 7 layers of plastic. So ultimately, the actual plastic we're using will have less plastic in it. And if we're keeping that food package longer, then we'll be throwing less plastic away. So hopefully we'll be getting less microplastics in all of our food and water sources and less contamination and less waste in general.
Wow, yeah, that's a really worthy goal. So, what challenges have you faced so far with implementing something like this that's new and novel to a lot of food companies?
The challenges are vast because it's an industry that is very successful and has been doing the same thing for a long time. And these are big companies with a lot of employees and managers, and so getting into the club has been challenging. Getting the right certifications to be taken seriously by the key players in the club has been challenging. Dealing with the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, to get our approval that we got last year was 3 years of work and hundreds of thousands of dollars of investment. So unless you have the time and the funds to actually go through that process, that's a big barrier to entry. And just being a new technology in general, explaining to people about copper and how copper, most people know that copper is good for you, but we don't know why. Like me before this, I knew copper was good for you, and some things with copper were good, but I didn't really know why. So there is a lot of teaching and a big learning curve to just explain to people, why copper is good, why it's good for you. We call it a trace element. It's a trace element, which means it's an element that is necessary for life. So like other minerals that some people will take a supplement of copper if they don't get enough in their diet or if their body is deficient in it. So it's something that your body needs to live. It's not another mineral that we're introducing to our body that could be toxic at some point if we take too much of it, right?
Yeah, I feel like that would resonate a lot with the consumer today because, we're just seeing kind of a drive toward not just, obviously food safety in general, but, reducing the amount of, chemicals that you're exposed to or, again, like things that your body maybe, doesn't need to your point. So have you seen that, that type of experience with the consumer? Like, are they thinking, oh, yeah, this is a great way to change the way that we package food?
Yeah, everyone that we talk to is sold on it really, either from the marketing point or either from the technical point or R&D side, because every company on the company side, because our clients are we're a B2B company, right? Business to business. So we sell our product to a food packaging manufacturer, right? And then they ultimately sell food packaging to people who distribute food, right? So I have to convince the food distributor, who is ultimately the person interested in my product, to then, buy packaging from a packaging supplier who uses my technology, right? So we often have to go multiple steps of up the chain till we find our client, right? Because if you're the food distributor who wants to use my product, you don't necessarily create your own packaging, right? You buy it from someone else. So I have to convince you that you want to buy it, and then I have to convince the person you buy from that I'm their guy, and they need to buy my product. So it's an interesting process, and they all find the value, right? They all see the benefit, but the only one who actually takes that benefit and benefits from it is the food distributor. They're the ones who deal with the customer complaints, the waste, returns, stuff that doesn't get sold, all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that, the layers that you're going through to kind of get this implemented. And you mentioned previously the FDA. So, like talk to me about how global regulations and, those regulatory authorities are kind of part of this process. And are they, drivers of change or, how do you see them fitting into what you've done so far?
Yeah, it was an interesting process with the FDA because they'd never seen anything like this before. So we had to do a lot of explaining on the way to get them to understand exactly, how the product works. That we're not food preservant, we're not other products that exist out there. It's actual a supplement for the packaging, and so it took us probably longer than it would someone approving another product or technology or something that's already known, right? But it was interesting for us because we had to really explain to them uh, the benefits and why it worked, and do a lot of double testing just to prove that the first tests were right. Because sometimes the tests were, I don't want to toot my own horn, but the tests were so good that they were like, "This can't be accurate." This we're going to call this unconclusive, and we need to do it again. And then the second test comes back the same, and they're like, "Oh my god, this is great! This is awesome technology." We're like, "Yes, we've been telling you this."
Yeah. Yeah, but being so new, it was like a foreign concept probably that.
Exactly, so that was interesting, and the FDA is great, and that's great in the United States, and it's necessary, but as soon as you leave the United States, it's just a reference, right? Every country has their own regulatory systems. Some will default to the FDA, smaller countries, but Europe, Brazil, Mexico, these countries have, their own approval processes that you have to go through. So, right now, we're really focused on the US market. We wanna convince everyone in the US that we're the best solution for food packaging and antimicrobial in general, because right now we're focused on food packaging, but it can work in any plastic. Any plastic resin can be mixed with our product. So, we foresee us being involved in the whole line of production when it comes to food safety, right? not only the packaging, but the production process as well when it comes to logistical trays and bins or conveyor belts or surfaces or cutting boards or anything else that's made of plastic in the process where there's risk of cross contamination. Our product will keep that plastic antimicrobial, those surfaces antimicrobial, without the intervention of someone applying a chemical or product regularly, without another technology having remembered to do it. It's already there. It's already working. It doesn't require any other supervision afterwards, which is a big change, which is a big game changer between our product and other products that are also antimicrobials or antibacterials.
Yeah, yeah, I was gonna ask about that because it seems like it could be applied not just to the package of the food itself, but there's so many different points along the, food supply chain that feels like it could be relevant.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why we wanna be taken we wanna be a player taken seriously when it comes to food safety, and we've had a few examples of how the unsanitary conditions or standard SOPs not being followed by employees generating, big contamination issues. We've seen, a few deals with McDonald's having a contamination issue this year. That was a big deal for them. Boar's Head also just this year had big listeria issues in one of their factories. So we're confident that we can be a solution for all of these bacteria or microorganisms that are, harming people and causing operators lots of headaches and lots of extra costs to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I think last year we did see a lot of recalls just in general, and there's so many factors involved with that. So I think that's a great point. I'd love to talk about the shelf life extension just a little bit more. So what are, in your testing, experience and everything, like how much more shelf life is there with something like this? Or, what can a customer expect if they were using a traditional versus Copperprotek?
Shelf life, we can extend shelf life by different quantities and different products. Why? Because each product rots differently, right? Some come with a very high bacteria loading, like fish, chicken, and then raw meat might have less of bacteria loading. So, for let's take an example like ground beef, right? I think we're all familiar with ground beef. Ground beef, well, we can extend shelf life up to 40% from what they're getting in ground beef. So that means not only will that product be consumable, right, by the legal parameters for 40% longer, but it will also, during that time, be smelling better, be looking better, be, the appearance and all of the other visual qualities, the appearance qualities, us as the consumer, when we pick up a piece of ground beef, package of ground beef. We don't want to see any brownness. We don't want to see too much liquid. If we open it and it smells bad, oh, this meat's bad, right? When reality, it might not be bad. It just might smell bad, right? But that smell will make us think the meat's bad, and you might not buy that brand again because you're like, oh, I bought once and the meat was bad. But so not only will the distributor be able to say this food lasts longer, but maybe they don't want it to last longer. Maybe they just want it to look and smell fresher and appear fresher during the time that they have it out there. Because maybe their problem is they're selling all their product, but they're getting too many customer complaints because the customer, once they open it, they think it's bad, right? So so not only can we extend shelf life, but we can keep it looking better, smelling. We can slow the whole decaying process, right? The whole rotting process of the food will slow it down. So there's a lot of value there as well. Not only can we say it'll last longer, because some products like cheese, right? Cheese lasts forever. Um, cheese don't really need shelf life extension, but they're happy to hear that the package might keep the cheese fresher once it's open, right? Because once it's open, a few days later, it starts molding, right? Because the package, even if you close it properly, there's still air in there, and you touched it, and there's other things creating bacteria. So our packaging would also keep it fresher longer in your fridge, not only on the shelf of the store.
Yeah, I think it's funny that you use those two examples because literally I feel like I buy like a thing of ground beef and I'm like, if I don't use it within 2 days, I'm like, "Well, this is bad." And my husband's like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "Yep, I don't like how it looks." Like I immediately get rid of it. And I mean, but food waste is a big problem because of that, and even when we talk about just global implications for food security in developing nations, I mean, do you see like maybe this as potentially, fighting off food insecurity, or, how can it help with some of these other issues that we see globally?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of statistics out there that are just shocking, right? 30% of food that we produce ends up in the trash, for example, right? When I think of that, of how we can have people that don't have food and then other people wasting 30% of what gets produced, that's a real motivator for me to try to, just limit what we throw away. And I think a lot of us are we think we know, we're like, oh, I don't like this anymore, or maybe one piece of it's bad and the rest of it isn't bad. I'm not going to tell people how to eat, but we see something and like it's bad, and then it all goes in the trash. Yeah. And and another part of my upbringing was food waste. We didn't waste food in my house. We lived in a rural area. My mom had a little horse farm, and we were surrounded by farmers, and where there wasn't much waste. We consumed everything that we ate. I mean, we ate everything that we bought, and we consumed most of what we had. And that was a good experience for me, and I really enjoyed that. And so when I find myself being wasteful now, it really bothers me.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear that. And I completely see what you're saying. So I feel like a lot of this probably, we talked about it being new and innovative and all of that, but like, how have you gone about educating the industry? And, I know you already talked about kind of the experience with the FDA, but how do you educate consumers? How do you educate the industry on like this potential benefit that they could have?
Yeah, well, we have a lot of lab tests, right? Because at the end of the day, this is a scientific company. Even though I'm not a scientist or an engineer, I deal with them all the time now. And, we want to have a product that can go in all plastics, right? So we just want to get our technology into every use case possible so we can, benefit and help others benefit as much as we can. So what lots of lab testing, right? The science, to prove all of the science, we have lots of lab testing, and that's the first step. Showing people the data, and because we're dealing with engineers and we're dealing with scientists, and then it's getting them to use the product. Okay, so once I convince you that the technology is there and there's some science behind it, I have to give you samples. So then I have to find other people to make packaging or whatever I want to sell with my product, and then get those samples into the hands of potential customers. And then if that works, they say, okay, I'll make your product. So now that's when I have to give them the microparticles, and then they actually make their own packaging, and then they test that and make sure that works. Right. So it's lots of trial and error. Once I get past convincing the potential clients about the science, then it's a lot of trial and error. And first, here's a sample, try it. And then it's like, okay, let me make my own samples, let me try it. And each trial can be 3 months, 4 months, because that's how long it takes food to go bad. So anyway, it's a very lengthy process and time consuming. And the best way that we've been dealing with it is just trying to develop the best relationship we can. Once we get our foot in the door and we convince a potential client that the technology works, it's really just being on the top of mind and having a good relationship with the people, because it's going to be months and months and months of back and forth and communication and visits and getting to know people for them to take time out of their busy lives to try something new, which is basically what we're talking about.
Yeah, it feels like the whole process for something like this does take a lot of time to just get the adoption. But really, really interesting and really cool. So my next question is really like looking ahead, what do you envision as, the future of food safety, kind of aligning to the reduction of food waste and the need to take care of the planet and kind of like all of these things that I feel like your product is aiming for. Like, how does it all come together? And, especially within food safety.
I think it's a great time. Like I said earlier, this is a very successful industry that hasn't seen much innovation over the past decades. And every company is not only worried about their bottom line, but they're also worried about the environment and they're also worried about food safety. So we are fortunate enough to check multiple boxes on what companies are looking for, right? Because we can help your bottom line, we can help you check the sustainability box, and we can help keep your product safer. And even if kind of companies aren't interested in sustainable, they need to pretend like they are. And it's part of their mission and vision that we want to be more sustainable and whatnot. So the fact that we can ultimately reduce the amount of plastic that goes into the packaging and that we could reduce the amount of waste is really relevant to the topics of conversation today. And that's the void that we want to fill. We want to be the product that can add value in those three environments.
Yeah, I think it's great when you see, a company or a product that is, obviously helping companies ultimately save money and, be profitable, but at the same time, leading towards improvements in the whole industry, the process that, food safety is so important, the environment is important, all of these things, and kind of like you said, it just kind of seems like it comes together. So this has been very interesting. I have a couple of closing questions for you. So I like to ask, and we're actually past quarter 1 now, but we're still in 2025 and we're still kind of at the beginning. So what is your food industry prediction for 2025 for the rest of the year?
I see many pain points in the food industry these days. And our goal is just to be a solution in as many of them as possible. I don't see any other solutions out there for problems like listeria. We're very confident that our technology can have an impact on killing listeria and reducing the growth of listeria. So our goal is just to keep testing our technology and to keep looking for other opportunities and other benefit that we can add, and to explain to everyone in the service world, food packaging world first, that we are a new solution and that we are very effective and they need to try us.
Yeah, well, I'd love to see that adoption through the rest of this year. And then lastly, I guess, what advice would you offer to food companies that are really looking to adopt, sustainable packaging solutions and enhance food safety?
I would say keep an open mind, number one. Number two, and choose your team wisely, because we have seen, we've been in contact with many companies out there, and there's a clear difference of companies that have teams that are open-minded and curious and asking the right questions. And then there's others that are like, oh yeah, no, we've got the best things already and we know what we're doing. And frankly, those teams are missing an opportunity today.
Absolutely agree. I love that. Finally, how can listeners kind of keep up with what's going on with Copperprotek and, where can we see you guys next?
We are trying to be everywhere we can and spread awareness as fast as possible. So look for Copperprotek in any of the big conferences that have to deal with meat distribution or food packaging. And look for us on future shows with you. Hopefully, we get invited back and everyone's happy. And we're really going after the big players that are manufacturing food packaging. And so we'll be anywhere where we can target food distributors or food packaging suppliers.
Awesome. Well, Johnathan, this has been really interesting, educational for me. I'm excited to start to see this as a consumer myself. So thank you so much for joining us. And we appreciate you being here.
All right. Well, thank you, Lydia, and we'll talk soon.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us for another bite-sized nugget of Food Tech Talk, supply chain insights from farm to fork. Make sure to subscribe. And if you love the podcast, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. To learn more about TrustWell and request your free demo of our technology platform that connects food formulation, products, nutrition analysis, and compliant labeling with traceability, recall readiness, and supply chain transparency, please visit us at www.trustwell.com and click Get Started or click the link in the show notes to learn more. Thanks for listening.